So imagine the absolute greatest performer in a high-stakes profession, right?
Yeah.
Like a literal icon.
Oh yeah, someone that literally everyone looks to, everyone relies on.
Exactly. Now imagine finding out that they were mathematically the worst leader their organization had ever seen.
It's the kind of jarring paradox that just forces you to rethink how talent actually works,
Right.
because we naturally assume that brilliance in one area just automatically transfers over.
Right. And to really ground this for you, we need to look at the actual numbers because they paint just a stunning picture. We were talking about Sachin Tendulkar.
The absolute legend.
Yeah, but get this. He captained the Indian national cricket team in 25 test matches. He won 4. He lost 9.
Wow.
That is a win percentage of 16.
Which is, frankly, an astonishing anomaly when you place it next to the captains who came immediately after him, or, even the one right before him.
Yeah, let's lay out those comparisons to show just how stark this is. So Sourav Ganguly's win percentage was 43. MS Dhoni's was 45. Virat Kohli hit 58. And even Mohammad Azharuddin, who was the captain actually replaced by Tendulkar, he had a 29% win rate.
That is wild.
So the greatest batter of his generation, maybe of any generation, had the worst captaincy record of any modern Indian leader.
And this has been Indian cricket's quietest open secret for, the better part of 2 decades. Nobody really wants to talk about it because of what Tendulkar represents to the country. I mean, he is a cultural deity.
He really is. But let's be incredibly clear about one thing up front. Sachin Tendulkar is one of the greatest batters to ever walk onto a pitch.
Undoubtedly.
Yeah, so this deep dive is not about his batting. This is about something the sporting world has avoided for decades, which is that his captaincy failed. Twice.
And that's our mission today. We're pulling from match statistics, historical reports, player autobiographies, and decades of expert commentary to really look past the usual comfortable excuses.
Because there are a lot of them. Yeah.
Oh, tons. If you bring this up, you immediately hear the same defenses. He was too young, the team was weak around him, or it was just a messy transition phase for the sport.
Yeah, people use those excuses to wave the failure away, to pretend his captaincy was just some minor footnote. But the reality is much heavier.
Right.
He was given the role twice, he resigned both times, and he never captained India in tests again. That's not a footnote. That's a pattern.
Exactly. And we need to unpack why that pattern exists. Why did the ultimate master of the game struggle so profoundly to lead others in it?
And honestly, this isn't just about cricket. I want you to think about your own workplace or your industry. What happens when an organization assumes its most talented individual contributor will naturally make the best manager?
Right, the classic mistake.
We see it everywhere. But the fallout is rarely examined this clearly.
Well, to really understand the anatomy of this failure, we have to go back to the beginning. We need to look at why he was handed the captaincy in the first place.
Okay, set the scene for us.
So, the year is 1996. Indian cricket is in a state of absolute crisis and desperately needs a cultural reset. Mohammad Azharuddin, the current captain, is rapidly losing the trust of both the nation and the cricket board.
So the board is facing a massive public relations dilemma.
Yeah, they need a savior. Fast. So they choose a 23-year-old Sachin Tendulkar.
Just 23.
Right. And they don't select him because he had spent years demonstrating incredible leadership skills or because he was some tactical mastermind in domestic cricket. They chose him simply because he was the best player in the country.
It's just a fundamental structural flaw in organizational thinking. The selection committee operated on this flawed logic: the best batter must naturally be the best leader.
It wasn't a strategic appointment at all. It was a coronation. They were just trying to restore the team's shining image by putting their brightest star at the front of the room.
I look at this and I immediately think of the Peter Principle. The idea that people in an organization get promoted to their level of incompetence.
Oh, that's exactly it.
It's like taking your absolute best world-renowned heart surgeon and just making them a hospital administrator.
Yeah.
You expect the exact same world-class results, but suddenly they're dealing with budget sheets and HR disputes instead of a scalpel.
And the whole hospital falls apart.
Exactly.
That analogy captures the dynamic perfectly. The skill sets required are entirely different. But, to be fair to Tendulkar, the transition wasn't an immediate disaster.
Right, there was a honeymoon phase.
Yeah, the first stint started with some real promise. He secured some wins at home. They won the Titan Cup against Australia and South Africa. You could totally see why the board made the gamble.
But the illusion of success shatters the moment they go overseas. Away tours to places like South Africa and the West Indies really exposed a severe tactical rigidity.
Yeah, the team was heavily dependent on Tendulkar's bat, and as a captain, he just wasn't finding ways to manufacture major away victories.
What does that tactical rigidity actually look like on the field?
Well, in cricket, it often looks like setting overly defensive fields too early in a match or failing to creatively rotate your bowlers to break a partnership. Like, when the primary plan didn't work, there didn't seem to be a dynamic plan B, C, or D.
Which brings us to the defining moment of this first stint, the "oh damn" moment that really broke the illusion.
Oh man, the Barbados test?
Yes, it's the 1997 Barbados test against the West Indies. To set the scene, India had bowled the West Indies out for just 140 in the second innings. This meant India only needed 120 runs to win the match. Just 120.
And for context, on almost any pitch in the world, chasing 120 in a test match is considered a highly achievable, almost routine target for a professional batting lineup.
Right. And Tendulkar was so incredibly confident they had this in the bag. The night before the final chase, he's at a restaurant in Barbados, and he gets into this playful banter with a waiter.
I love this story.
It's crazy. The waiter is predicting a West Indian win, claiming their legendary fast bowler, Curtly Ambrose, is going to bounce the Indian batters out.
Which is a bold thing to say to the Indian captain.
Totally. But Tendulkar is entirely unfazed. He actually points to the restaurant's fridge and tells the waiter to chill a bottle of champagne so he can come back the next day and pour him a glass to celebrate the impending Indian victory.
That is a staggering level of confidence. I mean, bordering on hubris. But when you are Sachin Tendulkar and you've spent your life conquering bowlers, chasing 120 probably feels like a mere formality.
But the next day, instead of popping champagne, the script flips in the most horrific way imaginable. India completely collapses.
It was a disaster.
They are bowled out for a pathetic 81 runs. They lose the match by 38 runs.
81 all out, chasing 120. The psychological whiplash of that is just immense.
Tendulkar later wrote in his autobiography that it was a dark day and the absolute worst day of his captaincy career. It's a moment where the waiter's faith completely triumphs over Tendulkar's overconfidence.
Yeah.
But what really strikes me is what happens in the dressing room afterward.
Right, because when you are the star batter, if the team is in trouble, you can just grab your bat, walk out to the middle, and physically change the game yourself. You have complete agency.
You can fix it.
Exactly. But when you are the captain sitting in the pavilion, watching your teammates parade back and forth, getting out for single digits, you are completely powerless.
And that feeling of powerlessness didn't just stay in Barbados. It followed him home. The burden of being the best player and the failing leader began to fracture him, which leads to him voluntarily stepping down from the captaincy in 1998.
But the underlying sickness in Indian cricket didn't magically heal just because he stepped down.
Right.
There was a massive lack of alternative leadership. Nobody else had been groomed for the role. This created a vacuum, and by 1999, that vacuum pulled him right back in.
So the second stint begins. From 1999 to 2000, Tendulkar takes the reins again. He's 26 now, entering his absolute physical and mental peak as an athlete.
Prime Tendulkar.
Yeah, but the results, they're somehow even worse. It's an unmitigated disaster. India suffers a 0-3 whitewash in Australia and then a 0-2 loss at home to South Africa.
We really have to establish the environment he was operating in during the second stint, though. The late 90s and the year 2000 coincided with the darkest moral crisis in the history of the sport.
The match-fixing scandal.
Exactly. Based on comprehensive CBI reports and explosive confessions from international players like Hansi Cronje, Mohammad Azharuddin, and several others were implicated in a massive match-fixing ring.
And just to be clear, we're just stating the findings here. But the foundation of the sport was essentially crumbling in real time. Fans didn't know if the dropped catches or the sudden batting collapses they were watching on television were genuine sporting mistakes or choreographed for illegal bookmakers.
It was incredibly bleak. And Tendulkar later admitted that he was simply not in the right frame of mind during this period. I mean, think about the mental toll. He is trying to set a field, formulate a strategy, and lead a dressing room where he couldn't fully trust the absolute commitment of the 11 men on the field with him.
That toxic atmosphere is undeniable. But even if we strip away the match-fixing scandal, there was a fundamental, almost tragic disconnect between Tendulkar and the rest of his team.
Right.
And nothing illustrates this better than the famous Javagal Srinath outswinger story.
Oh, this specific anecdote perfectly captures the ultimate blind spot of genius.
So Javagal Srinath is one of India's premier fast bowlers at the time, but he's struggling to bowl to certain right-handed batters on an overseas tour. Tendulkar approaches him and wants him to pitch the ball outside the off stump and bowl an outswinger, meaning the ball starts straight and then aggressively swings away from the batter at the last second.
A very specific delivery.
Yeah. Srinath tries in the practice nets, but he just can't execute it. He is naturally an in-swing bowler, right? His wrist and mechanics are built to move the ball the other way.
And making that switch isn't a small adjustment. Like, for a fast bowler, changing the direction of your swing requires altering your grip, your wrist position at the exact point of release, and your entire bowling action. It is incredibly physically demanding.
But Tendulkar doesn't see it that way. After watching Srinath struggle, what does Tendulkar do? He literally grabs the ball from his premier fast bowler, steps up in his street clothes essentially, bowls an absolutely perfect outswinger himself, hands the ball back, and simply says, just do that.
Just do that. I mean, to a once-in-a-generation prodigy, the mechanics of the sport are purely intuitive.
But it's physically impossible for a normal player to just manifest a new skill on command.
And that is the tragedy of his captaincy. Tendulkar couldn't understand the physical limitations of mere mortals. He expected every player to just effortlessly meet his own towering standards of excellence.
And when they couldn't,
He viewed it as a lack of effort rather than a lack of ability, which obviously led to massive frustration on both sides of the relationship.
which brings us back to the stark reality of the numbers. Because no matter how much context we provide, the stats are unavoidable. Tendulkar had a 16% win rate. Sourav Ganguly came in at 43%. MS Dhoni at 45%. Virat Kohli at 58%. Even Azharuddin was at 29%.
It's crazy.
This is not a slight dip. This is a massive, gaping chasm in leadership effectiveness.
And that gap had a very tangible, immediate cost. It wasn't just that the team as a collective was losing matches. Tendulkar's own individual performance was taking a hit under the weight of the leadership.
The numbers back that up completely. As a non-captain, his batting average was hovering around a phenomenal 56.
Insane.
Right. But as a captain, his average dropped to around 51. Now, a 51 average is still incredible, Hall of Fame caliber for literally anyone else. But for him, it is a definitive drop. The captaincy didn't just fail the team, it acted as a restrictor plate on his own impact.
Which leads us to the most uncomfortable question we have to ask about this era. What did those lost years actually cost Indian cricket? Because while Tendulkar was struggling through his captaincy, Sourav Ganguly was waiting in the wings.
The evolution of the team's leadership was delayed.
Yes.
So let's look at the direct head-to-head comparison to see what that delay cost them. Look at the 1999 to 2000 Australia tour under Tendulkar. India lost 3-0, they lost by heavy margins. There was no real tactical response to the Australian dominance. It was a brutal whitewash.
Right.
Now, compare that to just a few years later, the 2003 to 2004 tour under Sourav Ganguly.
And keep in mind, they're playing against a similarly dominant, legendary Australian opponent on the exact same soil.
And Ganguly's India draws this series 1-1. It's the exact same opponent level. But a wildly different result. That difference isn't a sudden influx of talent. That difference is pure leadership.
Absolutely. The stylistic differences between the two men explain the results. You know, Tendulkar was a quiet leader. He tried to lead by example, hoping his technical brilliance would inspire the rest. But he did not possess the psychological tools to reshape the team's overarching mindset.
While Ganguly was the polar opposite.
Totally.
He was aggressive, combative, and theatrical. I mean, to understand Ganguly, you just have to look at the 2002 NatWest final. India wins a thriller in England. Ganguly famously takes off his shirt and waves it wildly from the balcony at Lord's.
Iconic moment.
To a casual observer, it just looks like a guy celebrating. But Lord's is the mecca of cricket. It is stuffy, traditional, all ties, and polite applause. Ganguly ripping his shirt off was a massive middle finger to the old colonial, submissive mindset of Indian cricket.
Yeah, he was sending a message to the world, and more importantly to his own dressing room, that they were no longer going to be polite losers. He fundamentally changed their belief system. He backed his players publicly in a way Tendulkar never quite managed.
To see the impact of that backing, look at the trajectory of a player like Harbhajan Singh. Under Tendulkar in 1998, Harbhajan was struggling so profoundly with his form and his confidence that he was almost expelled from the National Cricket Academy.
Really?
Yeah. He was literally considering giving up professional sports entirely to move to the United States and drive trucks for a living.
That is wild. He was on the verge of walking away from the game completely. But when Ganguly takes over the captaincy, he recognizes the raw talent. He fights the selectors to keep Harbhajan in the squad, holds his hand through the rough patches, and backs him completely for the defining 2001 Australia series.
And Harbhajan repays that faith by becoming a match winner, taking a historic hat-trick against the greatest team in the world.
Incredible turnaround.
So I really have to push back on the common narrative that apologists use here. People constantly make excuses for Tendulkar, saying his team was exceptionally weak, the bowling attack was bad, and the era was just too tough to win in. But if Ganguly took over and turned the exact same core group of players into a highly competitive overseas team almost immediately, doesn't that completely invalidate the weak team excuse?
I would argue it shatters the excuse entirely. Yes, the 1990s era was difficult, and the domestic structure wasn't churning out fast bowlers the way the modern Indian system does. But other captains operating in the exact same environment achieved more.
Yeah.
Azharuddin had better results before him. Ganguly proved the potential of the roster immediately after him. The failure was not a lack of material, it was the failure of the architect to build something with it.
It's so easy to look at that 16% win rate, the Australian whitewash, the Barbados collapse, and just neatly label his captaincy as a complete and total failure, full stop.
But doing so ignores a vital, silent contribution he made to the sport that rarely gets the spotlight.
Because behind the scenes, away from the cameras, there was a massive victory that the public never saw.
Exactly. During that dark, chaotic chapter of the match-fixing scandal in 2000, Tendulkar, alongside two other highly respected senior players, Rahul Dravid and Anil Kumble, took a massive political risk.
What did they do?
They quietly went directly to the BCCI, the governing body of Indian cricket, and they drew a hard line in the sand. They insisted that players with dubious ties to illegal bookmakers and match-fixing could never be picked for the national team again.
Wow. They essentially staged a silent coup to clean up the rot.
They leveraged their immense star power to force the board's hand. So, Tendulkar couldn't win matches in Australia, but his insistence on a leadership of integrity ensured that the team the public watched going forward was entirely clean. He laid the moral foundation that allowed Sourav Ganguly to build a winning culture.
That is an incredible legacy. And it really shows that he learned from the chaos of his failures, which leads us to 2007. This is what I consider the ultimate redemption arc of his leadership journey.
Right.
Rahul Dravid unexpectedly steps down as captain. The BCCI, now under the leadership of Sharad Pawar, goes right back to their cultural deity. They offer Tendulkar the captaincy for a third time.
Because it was the expected next step for the senior statesman of the team,
Yeah.
The board just assumed he would want to write a final victorious chapter to his leadership story.
But this time, the 34-year-old Tendulkar declines the crown. He tells the board his body is in terrible shape, and he knows he can no longer handle the grueling physical rigors of batting and captaining across all formats of the game.
And instead of taking the power just for the prestige of it, he looks at the roster and recommends a young, long-haired wicketkeeper to take the job instead.
He officially recommends MS Dhoni.
And we all know the history that followed. Dhoni leads India to World Cup victories and takes them to the #1 test ranking in the world.
Yeah.
This moment in 2007 was Tendulkar's ultimate growth as a leader. He finally truly understood his own limitations. He recognized that his greatest contribution to the captaincy was having the wisdom to know who else should hold it.
He stepped aside so the right person could lead. That requires an incredible surrender of ego.
It shows a profound self-awareness, something he clearly lacked when the board thrust the job upon him at 23, but obviously possessed after years of hard lessons at 34.
We really need to bring all of these threads together, because this is not just a sports story about a guy who couldn't win games. This is a story about how society misunderstands greatness. Being the absolute best batter on the planet does not make you the best leader.
No, it doesn't.
And Indian cricket took years and wasted a lot of prime talent to finally learn that lesson.
They delayed their own evolution as a dominant team by forcing a role onto someone who just wasn't wired for it.
So what is the final verdict on Sachin Tendulkar as we wrap up this deep dive? He is the greatest batter of his era, among the absolute greatest to ever play the game. But as a captain, he failed statistically, he failed structurally, he stepped down twice, and he never returned.
And both of those truths exist simultaneously.
Yeah.
But for 20 years, only one is ever really discussed.
To sum it all up, Tendulkar didn't fail cricket as a captain. Cricket failed to understand what he was and what he wasn't.
When you look closely at this story, it leaves you with a much deeper question to mull over about the nature of heroes. We love creating prodigies. We love looking at someone with a singular, spectacular talent and projecting all of our hopes onto them, demanding they become our saviors in every possible way.
Yeah, we do it all the time.
But when we do that, when we demand that our geniuses be flawless leaders, are we stripping them of their humanity? Maybe the most destructive thing you can do to a brilliant mind is to refuse to let them have any weaknesses.
Just let a genius be a genius. Because when you force them to be everything to everyone, you might end up breaking the very thing that made them special in the first place.